Hello. Um, this is just another commentary video. One thing I wanted to talk about today is programmatic versus ideological unity, or partisan unity. You can substitute partisan for ideological if you want. Maybe even partisan unity is better because partisan unity is nominal. Like it doesn't even have a consistent necessary ideology commitment. The Democratic Party's ideological base has changed probably every half generation. So at least 10 times since its instantiation about 200 years ago, almost 300 years ago. And what would programmatic unity look like? Now, a lot of people confuse tactic, strategy, and program. Historically speaking, Marxists and other kinds of socialists who were related to the Marxist tradition, social democrats, various utopian socialists who'd work within political parties, etc., accepted a min-max program, or at least a immediate demands minimum program, and then a maximal program. Now, throughout the development of the Second International, development of Trotskyism, etc., there began to be both the maximalist position held by left communists and certain kinds of anarchists, as well as a transitional position held by Trotskyists and more or less held under different phrasing by different kinds of, people influenced by the Bolsheviks. Now, I could go into the history of that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the distinctions here. But what I've been amazed at is the way people have taken electoralism from the First and Second International and applied it as a kind of partisan loyalty or ideological loyalty. So you support socialist candidates who are self-proclaimed socialists, whether or not they show any advocacy for socialist policies beyond very basic level Marxist monetary theory, heterodox economic stuff, or the Green New Deal. And you don't even hold them accountable for calling those things onto the vote. And other times I mentioned that a lot of the socialists cannot hold other members who they get elected into Congress are more accountable than the party which those people have to caucus with or belong to. There's just no effective mechanism for them to do that. But part of that is because it's based on partisan loyalty. And this is something even somebody like Jimmy Dore, who, whether you like him or not, has a point about. If you cannot hold candidates to their program by advocacy shaming, even if they're going to lose, you cannot have a programmatic electoralism. You might talk about the strategic base for this, but if you can't call for an advocacy for Medicare for all when the Democrats recently won an election and it is, on margins popular, although it's not as popular as many socialists would like, if you can't call for that, what can you call for? If you can't call for a demand for a revisioning of American foreign policy to start dying down the empire, what can you call for? And this means you have to work with people that will vote for your policies over how you work with people who vote for your party. Now, in the parliamentary model, this actually makes sense to attach to a party because you could have an independent party from the tendency of two parties to dominate even in a parliamentary system that would be independent of running a coalition government in a parliament with a progressive liberal party or whatever, but would push for specific votes on actual policies. When you do not have a parliamentary system, you have a congressional system like the United States, that strategy has to be modified. And I hate to say this, but the best way to learn how to do this is to look at people who do business. When businesses set out to have an agenda, they don't play one side of the aisle. They're not loyal to a party first. They have objectives, and they run money on both sides to get to court people to their objectives, and they will run people to crush people who oppose their objectives. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter whether there's a D, R, and R after the name. A business's objectives, which is sort of like its program, is a beeline. It doesn't play at partisan. It's not about identity. It's about outcomes. Now, one of the problems with a programmatic approach to unity is that you have to work with people that you might find to be cretinists. All right? Because you're not basing it on a partisan identity. You're not basing it on an ideological set of purity as far as what you're advocating for in Congress. You side with people based on the issues alone. Now, your advocacy organization can have stricter litmus tests. I mean, I think super sectarian organizations are necessarily discrediting because they limit things too much. But what are you going to do with it? Like, you can have those organizations have like, okay, you must agree to, this is what we mean when we say socialism, this is what we mean when we say communism. So we have a consistent set of definitions. For example, for me, socialism is not about abstract notions of equality. Socialism is about a classless society. Now you might go, well, that is equality. It's a form of equality, yes, but it's not an abstracted, we're all equal before God notion of equality, right? It's not, you can't judge your fellow man notion of equality. It's not, you can't call people out for their mistakes or mishandlings. It's not that you should privilege unintelligent policymaking because we're all equal. All right? That's not what socialism is. In fact, those notions exist in liberalism and they create a very unequal society. In socialism, you might call someone a moron, but you're going to take care of them. It doesn't matter that they're a moron. You remove that implement from their existence, and your relations can be a lot more honest. All right. I feel this way also about like racial stuff. Not everyone in socialism, is going to be non xenophobic, but we're going to remove that as a means of power and a way of arbitrary limiting opportunity. It doesn't matter that people believe that. Like you can fight that out socially, but it's not going to decide someone's intrinsic economic or political worth. If you have a program that emerges organically from a class position or any kind, I mean, honestly, it can emerge from all kinds of identitarian positions. I like to use the Weber distinction of class as objective and related to economic and not inherently a collective actor, but can become a collective actor. Whereas, the other identities are social status, social categorization groups, where you may or may not have a collective action. You usually don't, but you can become one, and you both can identify or be identified as, categorized as that social category. It's a little bit different than class. Your relationship to production and exchange is not necessarily, although it can be, part of that identity. Class is different. Now, do I think you can reduce race to class or class to race? No, and that's why I use this schema. But I bring it up because I want a classless society. I think a lot of the other social antagonisms we have will be lessened once you start aiming towards classlessness. But that means a program has to aim towards classlessness in the immediate. All right? And I actually like the traditional First International framework of a min-max program. I actually had a schema that I worked out many years ago where there's a minimum, an immediate demands minimum transitionary program and something leading to development of a classless society, which we can't articulate right now because we're so far from that. But for example, immediate demands would either be something like a pre-civil rights era minimum wage guarantee set at either inflation or as a relation to the median wage. So at right now, if you were to set, for example, the minimum wage in 1962, that would actually equal to about $24 of purchasing power. So even the fight for 15 is actually anemic by the original minimum wage law once you adjust for inflation. But beyond that, let's say that you're afraid that that's going to crash the economy. Well, you do what the MMTers and whatnot say, and you put in a federal jobs guarantee, which in places where there are either jobs guarantees are a generous enough welfare system where such a job guarantee doesn't matter, such as Scandinavia, the the average low end wage, the starting salary is about $22 to $24 an hour in purchasing power. It's adjusted. Um, Notice how it works out. In some of those Scandinavian countries, they don't formally have a minimum wage, but it still works out as one because you have a welfare stopgap or a full employment promise that functionally keeps the market at that level. Either way, all right, that's a minimum demand. It doesn't matter which party gives you that. We know which one's more likely to, but sometimes coalitions and pressure works better when you can threaten the other side with breaking your loyalty. And that is something that you've seen in conservative circles. Yes, everyone talks about how conservatives vote in lockstep, but they also punish by staying home and by primarying far more than progressives do. Now, progressives aren't socialists by any stretch of the imagination, even by my somewhat, um, basic definition. A socialist is someone who wants to build towards a marketless, classless society, or let's just say a classless society. Even though I disagree with market socialism, really wouldn't devolve in the capitalism. I still think people who hold that are socialist. So they meet my definition of socialist. They want to build towards that society, and they would agree with my program. We could agree with this program on this plank. But it gets more difficult when you talk about, like, for example, ending empire, which we should all want to do, but doing so without creating big gaps and incentives for new empires to emerge in the void. Creating cooperative international frameworks. What does that look like? What should a minimum program stand on education? And I've been talking about how a lot of educational stuff doesn't work. And yes, we should all have equal access to the best quality education that we can provide for each other socially. And whether or not you believe that has to be through the state is an open question. But what that looks like is still going to have to be up for debate. Is free college part of that? What does free college look like? Is the best idea to go with the free college immediately, or it is to make, primary and secondary education good enough that most people don't need college and it's available? How do we forgive student loans? Is that something that's really going to help the working class? Yes, I actually think it is, but it will also disproportionately help the upper middle class, which in a Marxist framework, as I've said many times, might still be a working class, but that doesn't really appeal to most people's sense of fairness, right? Even though a lot of younger working poor people, and this is very generationally different, would benefit from student loan forgiveness. People who are professionals like doctors and and academics would benefit just as much as all those professors who make $31,000 a year as adjuncts and have $100,000 in debt to do it. Also, how would you end a lot of the cost disease in education and medicine? Because you would need to, and you'd need to provide some kind of backstop for those people without contributing more to further cost disease like this. You don't want that capacity wasted like that. It's not productive capacity. Do you want, I am a person who thinks, I'm not a no growth economic person, but how would we change our relationship to the use of natural resources? I think you can have, you know, um, very little conceptualization of economic growth, you'd have to have a major shift in the way we conceive that, but we would still be growing. But how would we use resources and shepherd them, and have, you know, something like energy expenditure homeostasis? I mean, like, these are things you have to deal with. And people complain about me using big words. I just mean that we would have, like a flat use of energy, um, and figure out ways to reduce energy use even as population maybe goes up or down. And populations will go through cycles, right? Um, so all these things are just to say. I mean, this is a very complicated way of saying. Is one of the reasons why we don't have programmatic unity is we don't have a program. It's not even a party you need. You need a program for that. You need organizations to enforce that program. I think multiple organizations, not just a partisan one. The parliamentary model is based on European style parliamentary politics, and that is what the internationals were built for. They come out of the experience of the workers' movements in Europe coalescing for parliamentary parties, whether they were electoral or not. And even in the case of the Bolsheviks, Lenin has been on all sides of that question, depending on the time period, because he thought it was a strategic or tactical question, not an absolute one. But let's say we could agree on some basic things. I think a real minimum wage, Medicare for all. If you were to do that and say AOC won't force the vote, what do? You don't necessarily even try to build an alternate party. You primary until you get someone who's going to be loyal to that plank. All right? There are hard trade-offs you have to make, but the ballot line like that only works if you can hold people accountable beyond the partisan identity. You have to stand above the fray on the program. The program matters more than any nominal party or nominal in your heart belief that you think people may or may not have. Functionally, all socialists right now are centrist progressives because that's what we support. Whether we believe something different is irrelevant to that. Now, I'm not saying the functional definition is the only definition that matters, but it is something that matters. So in these post-left debates, these PMC debates, everyone thinks I'm equivocating or I'm attacking the PMC because I think it's incoherent. And I do. But a lot of the stuff they're saying about this partisan identity and a class of people who are benefiting from it are a strata of people. It's not really a class in my mind, but whatever. A lot of what they're saying isn't wrong. And how you get past that is not opposing them and running to some right-wing opportunism. It's a programmatic unity that has program more than tactics, more than strategy, and more than partisan affiliation or organizational affiliation at its core. And if you wanted that to be a class program or a program for a classless society, you would also need it to come organically from the right people. So how we would achieve that, whether it be a minimum wage or a jobs guarantee or whatever, would largely depend on the opinion emergent amongst the majority of the people who want a classless society and of the working class itself. If you don't do that, then you don't take a lot of this seriously. And that's what programmatic unity really means, is you have goals. Now, this is a minimum program. My long-term goal, is building towards the abolition of classes and the end of nation states as we know it. Whether or not states still exist the way we think about it now is kind of an open question. But that's an orientation. That's what that program is meant to build us to. But our immediate goals have to be what they are, whether they're revolutionary or reformist. And most of the progressive stuff we see right now, frankly, is neither revolutionary nor reformist, even when it's talked about as reform. We're not even at that question right now. What would a minimum immediate program be? And Who would you run candidates for you? If AOC doesn't do it, if the squad doesn't do it, it doesn't matter. You run a candidate against them, or you hold them accountable in some way. And what socialists have is people power. And if we don't have people power, we don't have anything. Because we're not going to have the same amount of money as the bourgeois does. The bourgeois set the terms of money in the first place. They're the people who set up the legal structure of money. How do you think that's going to go? Now, like and subscribe here at Derek Varn's personal channel. I'm also going to be back on Theorizing with a Hammer every 2 weeks. In about 4 weeks, I'll be coming back to Pop the Left. I'm on the Emancipation Network, blah, blah, blah. Like and subscribe, hit the bell, etc. I might even up the production value of these one day. I got a good microphone, right? And I know a lot of people are going to be offended by what I said. Frankly, I aimed this at some of the comments I've gotten. But programmatic unity is more important than ideological unity. And it's definitely more important than ideological identification or partisan identification, right? And to have programmatic unity, sometimes you have to structurally agree with Cretans, okay? Not to be racist against the historical people of Crete, but we know what the word means now. And you're going to have to deal with people you don't like and who you think beaten down and aren't going to meet your moral code. I talk about virtue and stuff all the time, and I'm not one of those people who believes that socialists are or should encourage any kind of amorality. I don't, even most nihilists have a morality. They just don't want to, lay down a metaphysical truth claim or a metaphysical ontology to back it up. But even all that said, a lot of this program stuff is not about, is absolutely not about your moral position, other than the fact that you have these moral positions is why you want these policies. But other people who want the same policy as you can support them on a programmatic basis. That's what programmatic unity means, right? And that's way more important than supporting the DSA or supporting this, that, and the other. And it's way more important than your individual moral values. Because if you want those moral values to matter politically, you gotta have a program to enact them. And you gotta have people who believe in that program enough to hold a line that's beyond a personality line, beyond parasocial relationships, beyond demagoguery, beyond our immediate moral identitarian concerns. All right? You can bring those in. I'm not saying give those up. But when it comes down to the key planks of the program, that comes first. But we don't have a program right now. So we don't have a left organization that can enact a program. And without a left organization that can enact a program, you don't have a collective actor. And without a collective actor, you don't have a way to have class action that has real substantive aggregate meaning. I hope this is clarifying for you. You might go, well, this is just wordplay. No, it's not. Programs about outcomes. Ideologies are about justifications and beliefs for those outcomes. Parties are about maintaining aggregate power. Actually, like, they're not necessarily about even ideology. Like I said, look at the Democratic Party. Look at what you're seeing with the Republican Party. The beliefs change all the time. That is what you're going to have to do. And that is what serious outcome-driven people, like, I don't know, bourgeois businesses, lobbyist organizations do. They're not worried about the D or the R that much. They're worried about the outcome, and they'll punish people who don't give it to them, and they'll reward people who do. And they'll play both sides. And they'll play both sides against each other, too, to get what they want. If you want policy objectives, if you want a way to start getting to socialism, that's what you got to do. Or you have to take the absolutist route, like that we do nothing until we can bring it all in. But that means functionally you are a political abstentionist, totally, until you think you have the social power to overthrow the state. That's what that means. All right, and this is my rambling clarification, and I hope you guys get something from it. And if you don't need to subscribe. But if you do, like and subscribe, come back down. And if you don't, go away. Bye bye.